The US war with Iran has reignited. Several days of strikes have already been carried out, but there's something different about Operation Epic Fury the second time around. It's not just about air power anymore. The US has learned its lessons and knows that the Strait of Hormuz will be the key to success the second time around. So the US has unleashed a secret weapon. And it's not just any old weapon. This is something that Ukraine innovated and the US has learned how to use. Ukraine gave the US the key. Now, in a US first, that key is being used to unlock the Strait of Hormuz barrier, and Iran isn't ready for any of it. What is that key? We'll let US Central Command or CENTCOM explain. In a July 13th article published on X, CENTCOM revealed that it had launched a wave of offensive strikes against Iran the previous day, and that those strikes hit multiple locations, all with the express goal of preventing Iran from attacking shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM forces struck Iranian military air defense systems, coastal radar sites, missile and drone capabilities, and small boats using US fighter aircraft, naval vessels, one-way attack aerial drones, and one-way attack sea drones for the first time, the article revealed. It's that last statement that is the kicker. For the first time ever, the US has used Kamikaze maritime drones in an attacking capacity against an enemy. And in doing so, America has just shown the world that it's been inspired by everything that Ukraine has managed to achieve against Russia in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Ukraine is the innovator of this era of drone technology, and it has laid down the blueprint for using sea drones to control a relatively small body of water. Ukraine's secret weapon is now being used against Iran. But is it actually a Ukrainian-made weapon that is doing the damage? There were signs that it might have been that emerged about a month before the US finally used sea drones for the first time. On June 9th, United 24 media reported that Ukraine's Magura V5 maritime drones had made their debut in the Indo-Pacific during a US training operation. The drone made an impression. The operation, which included 17,000 soldiers, managed to sink a target ship during a live fire exercise in the Philippines, demonstrating that it is precisely what Ukraine has always shown it to be. This is the same drone that wreaks havoc on Russia's Black Sea fleet, to the point where that fleet is basically a non-factor in Ukraine today. And in the Philippines, the US got its first direct dose of the power of Ukraine's weapon. The US even conducted this strike in the Luzon Strait, which seemed like a purposeful move, to show countries that control narrow waterways, such as Iran with its hold over the Strait of Hormuz, that the US can use maritime drones effectively. That operation marked the official spread of Ukraine's drones beyond the Black Sea. And it might lead you to the assumption that it was the Magura V5 that the US used to strike Iran on July 12th. However, those assumptions are wrong. The US may have been testing the Magura V5, and it may well bring the power of that drone, which has a 320-kilogram payload and a 430 nautical mile range, to bear in the Strait of Hormuz soon. But for its first ever combat deployment of a sea drone, the US may have been inspired by Ukraine's Black Sea exploits, but it wanted to use a drone it developed itself to send the message to Iran that a new type of weapon is in town. It wasn't the Magura V5 that the US used on July 12th. It was the Corsair. In its report on what CENTCOM did in Iran, the Military Times says that the US used Corsairs to assist in degrading Iran's ability to continue to attack commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's easy to see why the US might have preferred to use that sea drone over Ukraine's more established drone. The Corsair is a powerhouse. Built by Texas-based Saronic, the Corsair measures 24 feet and it can deliver a 1,000-kilogram payload over a range of more than 1,000 nautical miles. So it can travel more than twice the distance of the Magura V5 and delivers more than 3 times the explosive force in a kamikaze strike. The Corsair can also hit speeds of up to 35 knots, which makes it fast enough to deal with the Iranian fast boats that are the main threat posed in the Strait of Hormuz. After all, Iran's traditional navy isn't going to be able to do much. Toward the tail end of the first phase of Operation Epic Fury, the US was claiming to have destroyed over 160 of Iran's naval vessels, essentially putting Iran's navy to bed early on. Now it's the fast boats and similar small vessels that form the crux of Iran's strategy. Following Ukraine's Black Sea blueprint, the US now wants to make the Corsair the perfect counter. You may be wondering why the US may have chosen the Corsair over the Magura V5 from a combat perspective. Yes, the Corsair is more powerful and can travel further, but the Magura V5 is a proven ship killer. That might make you think it was a better choice. However, the Corsair is far from untested. In fact, it's been used by the US before, albeit not for the type of mission that we've just seen. The Corsair platform has logged over 100,000 nautical miles, so it's hardly like the drone has just been dropped into the sea for the first time in Iran. It also has a solid track record in other types of missions. A recent track record too. It was only on June 8th the US used a Corsair to rescue the crew of an AH-64 Apache helicopter that had crashed off the coast of Oman, Task and Purpose points out. That chopper is believed to have been struck by an Iranian drone, and the Corsair showed that it could offer a low-risk way of navigating through the Strait of Hormuz to save soldiers. That was a US first in its own right, only this was the first time that America had used a sea drone to rescue personnel stranded at sea. What CENTCOM did with the Corsair on July 12th was much different. What the US has done here is watch Ukraine reshape modern naval warfare. Inspired by the likes of the Magura, which we remind you may find its own way into the Strait of Hormuz soon, the US has unleashed a showcase of sea drone power against Iran that is a clear signal to the Tehran regime that the battle over the Strait of Hormuz is going to go differently this time around. Like the Black Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is a relatively small body of water with clear access points. It's controllable. However, questions remain that we haven't answered yet, chief among them being what the US actually struck with the Corsair. We know that a first-of-its-kind strike took place, but what did it take out? You're about to discover the answer, but first, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the perfect time to hit the button. There is a key difference between Ukraine's Black Sea campaign and what the US just did with its sea drone, and the difference lies in the type of target that was struck. Ukraine focuses primarily on taking out ships with its sea drones because it knows that Russia can't replace warships that have been taken out in the Black Sea. The US doesn't have that luxury when it comes to Iran's fast boats, which are smaller, faster, and far more numerous than Russia's warships. So the US decided that instead of targeting the fast boats with the Corsair, it would go straight to the source, a base from which those fast boats depart. What the US did with the Corsairs on July 12th was part of a wider range of strikes that also incorporated aerial drones, warships, and fighter jets, which combined to attack dozens of Iranian military installations. However, it was the job of the Corsairs to target Bandar Abbas naval base. 3 of America's sea drones paid visits to that base, and it's clear why the US chose this particular target for its combat-first approach. Bandar Abbas is considered one of Iran's most important naval bases, as it's a primary installation for both the Iranian Navy and the naval forces deployed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. The latter is primarily responsible for the fast boat deployments Iran uses to disrupt shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Bandar Abbas is something of a jack-of-all-trades for Iran's naval forces, Sandbox reports. It's home to command and control points. Iran uses it as a staging point for its fast boats and mine layers, both of which have already caused plenty of problems in Hormuz. There are even missiles located at this particular base. But above all else, and perhaps the big reason why this base was the first to be struck by America's Corsairs, Bandar Abbas is located right at the tip of the bend in the Strait of Hormuz, which is pretty much bang on the center of the waterway. The base is central to everything. No ship that attempts to sail in or out of the strait can avoid Bandar Abbas, and any ship that Iran doesn't want in the Strait of Hormuz can be targeted by weapons unleashed from this particular base. So the US hit it with Corsair sea drones. And in doing so, America not only aimed to destroy the ports built into the base, but it also ensured that the risk posed by the Soviet-era air defense systems and the Chinese anti-ship missiles installed at Bandar Abbas would be practically worthless. Sandbox reports that America's specific target may have been the submarine repair and maintenance facilities at Bandar Abbas, which makes sense in the context of taking out the one aspect of naval power Iran has left that the US can't simply destroy with airstrikes and anti-ship missiles on the surface. However, the US hasn't confirmed anything yet, beyond that the strike took place and Corsair sea drones were involved. Now, Bandar Abbas is no stranger to American strikes. It has been hit before. However, Iran's regime wasn't ready for what the US had in store this time. it couldn't possibly be. The Corsair hadn't been used to conduct a strike before, and though Iran likely figured that the US would introduce sea drones into the battle for Hormuz eventually, it clearly didn't anticipate those drones being used to strike a base. Fast boats maybe, but one of the most fortified bases on the Iranian coast wasn't supposed to be hit. Yet it was. And though Iran might not have expected the Corsair to be America's weapon of choice, it knew that something was coming. US President Donald Trump made that very clear in the run-up to Operation Epic Fury reigniting. Frustrated that negotiations weren't progressing as fast as the US would like, or in the direction that the US wants them to go, Trump said on July 8th that America's ceasefire agreement with Iran was over, as he branded the country's leaders as cuckoo and scum. That came on the back of the worst exchange of strikes between the US and Iran that has been seen since the two sides signed a memorandum of understanding that, among other things, guaranteed a 60-day ceasefire period. We guess that guarantee didn't work out. The US is showing no signs that it's going to stop either. 2 days after its first ever use of a sea drone as a weapon, Trump said that Iran's power plants and bridges are next on the agenda, as the US also instituted a blockade against Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. Next week it gets really bad for them, Trump declared, adding, "We're going to knock out all of their power plants. We're going to knock out all of their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate." At the risk of sounding cynical, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It looks like the US and Iran are right back to where they were a few months ago. All of that leads us to the obvious question of what all of this means for the future. We have the US pulling off firsts along with the reignition of the aerial and naval strikes that defined the situation in the Strait of Hormuz for much of the period between March and June. This isn't a short-term thing for the Trump administration either. Trump has made it very clear that war with Iran is back on, and it's going to last for as long as the US needs it to last. Formal notification has been given to Congress that the US is resuming military activity in Iran in the form of a letter that Trump sent on July 10th, informing Congress that this activity has commenced. That has triggered debate in the US. A notification isn't the same thing as congressional approval. Not that the Trump administration looked for approval the first time around, of course. As the debate rages, we are more interested in the military implications of America's first use of a sea drone to launch a strike. Those implications are massive because this single incident may signal a wholesale shift in how the US develops and procures weapons. Saronic is a perfect example of the shift going on in America's defense industry right now. Once again inspired by Ukraine, the US is looking to its defense contractors to deliver actual warfighting capability, rather than spending untold millions of dollars on platforms and weapons that are as much about projecting power as they are about actually unleashing it. The Corsair is one of the results of this shift in defense procurement dynamics. The sea drone costs the US less than $1 million, making it cheaper than any of the missiles that America is using against Iran, and is capable of carrying out rescue and strike missions. What we're seeing here is a shift toward cost efficiency combined with combat effectiveness, which in a nutshell describes Ukraine's approach to developing weapons it uses against Russia to a T. This shift is ongoing. In Iran, we're likely to see the debut of several new weapons, though they'll complement what the US is already using rather than replace it. However, this shift is likely going to lead the US to developing a lot more drones of every type. Again, that's due to Ukraine. It has shown that drones can be used for practically every task imaginable in modern warfare, leaving the US in the unlikely position of playing catch-up in this department. Focusing back on the reignited conflict in Iran, it's obvious that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be the focal point for both the US and Iran. How could it not be? It was chaos in this waterway that defined Operation Epic Fury earlier in the year, as Iran's successful blockade resulted in oil prices skyrocketing and tensions exploding across the world, as the war restricted the Gulf nations' ability to sell oil and left many Western nations wringing their hands about a conflict they felt didn't need to happen. Oil prices have already started rising again, CNBC reports. It's no coincidence that the first strike carried out by a Corsair took place in the Strait of Hormuz. Ultimately, it will be whoever controls this waterway that comes out on top in the war between the US and Iran. Both sides know it. Trump has already declared a blockade, along with a demand for 20% tariffs from ships that has quickly been withdrawn. Iran says that it's going to halt all Middle East oil exports through the strait. Iran has also started attacking in its own right, as it struck US military bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, along with UAE-flagged oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, in retaliation for America's strikes. It's starting to feel like spring 2026 all over again. For the US, the difference now is that it has a new weapon in play in the Strait of Hormuz. How much of a game changer that weapon will be remains to be seen. The Corsair is clearly effective, but it seems unlikely that it will be used to chase down fast boats. The Financial Times estimates that Iran has anywhere between 500 and 1,000 of these types of boats, and using a fleet of sea drones that cost close to $1 million to go on the hunt for them is inefficient and may not be executable on a sheer numbers basis. Instead, the US may look to use the Corsair in the ways that we've already seen: rescues when required and strikes against ports and coastal bases that Iran is using to control the Strait of Hormuz. The logic is sound. Cutting Iran's fast boats off at the source reduces the impact they can have on shipping, giving the US more time to accomplish what it wants to do in Iran before the pressure from the international community weighs down as it did before. There is also a possibility that the Corsair could be used to escort merchant ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The US Naval Institute reported in June that the House Armed Services Committee has recommended this as a use case for America's sea drones, stating, "The committee believes that manned Army watercraft may be aided by dedicated unmanned surface vessels, USVs, providing enhanced force protection, early warning, sensing and defensive effects while reducing risk to personnel." The one abundantly clear thing is that the Corsair and perhaps other sea drones are being factored into Round 2 of Operation Epic Fury. The US has learned from Ukraine, and it knows how versatile these drones can be. And though it may not be able to execute the same strategy that Ukraine used against Russia in the Black Sea due to the number of fast boats that Iran brings to the table, America has just shown us how dangerous its Corsairs can be. Our guess is that we'll see more coastal strikes conducted by America's sea drones in the very near future. But beyond that, the possibilities are numerous, and what the US does next will likely come down to Iran's response in the Strait of Hormuz. We may also see the US introduce something far more expensive to the Iran war. You see, the US has a certain type of ship. Once branded a $22 billion disappointment, that ship has evolved from a disaster into a superweapon armed with hypersonic missiles that can strike targets thousands of kilometers away. What is this superweapon? You can find out if you watch our video. And if you found this video useful, we have plenty more coming up. Subscribe to The Military Show and ring the notification bell to ensure that you are notified whenever we publish a new video analysis. And thank you, as always, for watching.